Hi, kids. So, the last story I shared, How Spiders Saved Halloween, you might remember the costume that he thought of for trick-or-treating. And it was, yes, you remembered, a pumpkin. So, this story is a nonfiction story about pumpkins called The Pumpkin Circle. And it's written by George Levenson, and the photography is by Fowler. And hopefully I pronounced his name correctly, and my apologies if I did not. The pumpkin seed makes the pumpkin plant, and the pumpkin plant makes pumpkins. Deep within each pumpkin, the air is damp and cool. The walls are lined with teardrop seeds, each one a slippery jewel. Scrape them from their orange cave, wash away squishy mush, save a few to grow next spring, and have a bunch to munch. When the earth is soft and warm, plant those sleeping seeds. In about 1 week, out they peek. 2 fresh, young, fat green leaves. This garden will be home to many pumpkin cousins. 1 big pumpkin family, 5 varieties. Spooky, Max, and Lumina, Legrand, and Tiny Munchkin. Each one started from different pumpkin seeds, and you can see the different sizes of those seeds. Every passing minute awakens each new plant, reaching down with silky roots. Reaching up to dance. Week by week, the backyard patch spreads before your eyes, filling every inch of space with leaves and roots and vines. Huge green leaves grow toward the sky, prickly, lush, and wide. They soak up sun and water and make a shady place to hide. Twisty tendrils grasp like hands stretching out to cling. They roll down into fancy curls and wind up just like springs. Then, silently as angels, flower buds appear with pointy little collars and gleaming silver hair. Velvet petals open, brilliant sunlit bowls, delicately fragrant, a sign of pumpkin gold. Along comes the bees floating through the air, buzzing, gathering, guzzling, zooming everywhere. Butterflies and spiders, grasshoppers and snails explore the pumpkin garden as they travel private trails. 100 days of weather, 100 days of care. Pumpkins climbing up the fence, pumpkins everywhere. Help those pumpkins sit up straight so they grow up round and proud. Scratch on pumpkin names so they stand out in a crowd. Or just sit back, enjoy the view. Pumpkins grow because pumpkins know exactly what to do. When summer turns to fall, green turns to gold. Shorter days bring chilly nights, and pumpkin vines grow old. Now comes the harvest, pluck treasures from the vine, clear away lifeless leaves, hide the rags of time. Gather up the finished fruit, ripe and fully grown. Tidy up the garden. Make a cozy pumpkin home. Salute the pumpkin circle. Make way for pumpkin cheer. Behold the pumpkin miracle. We're pumpkin millionaires. Make up pumpkin faces and bright candlelight. Set them on your doorstep. Let them flicker through the night. Every day those pumpkins change. Getting older, getting strange, sinking, shrinking pumpkins. Back to earth you go, turning into muck and dirt. A place for seeds to grow. How did this begin? What is this pumpkin thing? Is there a Mother Nature? Is there a pumpkin king? We can be sure of this. It's a circle without end. It's pumpkin seeds to pumpkins seeds again. And that's the pumpkin circle. The last story I'd like to share with you today is a classic story by a wonderful artist and writer named Chris Van Allsburg. And this story is called The Widow's Broom. Witches' brooms don't last forever. They grow old, and even the best of them one day lose the power of flight. Fortunately, this does not happen in an instant. A witch can feel the strength slowly leaving her broom. The sudden bursts of energy that once carried her quickly into the sky become weak. Longer and longer running starts are needed for takeoff. Speedy brooms that, in their youth, outraced hawks are now passed by slow-flying geese. When these things happen, a witch knows it's time to put her old broom aside and have a new one made. On very rare occasions, however, a broom can lose power without warning and fall with its passenger to the earth below, which is just what happened one cold autumn night many years ago. Out of a moonlit sky, a dark cloaked figure came spinning to the ground. The witch, along with her tired broom, landed beside a small white farmhouse, the home of a lonely widow named Minna Shaw. At daybreak, Widow Shaw discovered the witch lying in her vegetable garden. She was bruised and bloody and couldn't stand up on her own. In spite of her fear, and because she was a kind woman, Minna Shaw helped the witch inside and put her to bed. The witch asked Minna Shaw to draw the curtains and then wrapped herself tightly in her black cape and fell soundly asleep. She lay there, perfectly still, all day and all evening. When she finally awoke at midnight, her wounds had completely healed. She rose from the bed and moved silently through the widow's house. Minna Shaw was asleep in a chair by the fireplace where embers of a dying fire glowed on the hearth. The witch knelt and took one of the red-hot coals in her hand. Outside, she made a fire of leaves and twigs and then dropped a strand of her hair into the flame. The fire hissed and crackled, burning with a brilliant blue light. Before long, the witch could see a dark form flying overhead. It was another witch who circled slowly and landed beside the fire. The two women spoke briefly, the first witch gesturing toward the garden where her old broom rested. Then they sat side by side on the second witch's broom and flew off over the treetops. When Minna Shaw woke up, she wasn't surprised to find that her guest had gone. Witches, she knew, had very unusual powers. It didn't surprise her either when she saw that the old broom had been left behind. The widow guessed it had lost its magic. It was an ordinary broom now, just like the one she kept in her kitchen. She began using it around the house and found that it was no better or worse than brooms that she'd used before. One morning, Minna Shaw was still in bed when she heard a noise coming from the kitchen. She peeked in and saw something that made her heart jump. There was the broom, sweeping the floor all by itself. It stopped for a moment and turned to the widow, then went back to work. At first, Minna was frightened, but the broom seemed harmless, and what's more, it was doing a very good job. Unfortunately, it swept all day long. In the evening, to get some peace, she locked the broom in a closet. But when it tapped on the door for more than an hour, Minna felt guilty and let it out. As she lay in bed listening to the broom sweeping each room over and over, she wondered if it could learn to do other things. In the morning, she led the broom outside and found out that it was a very good student. She needed to show it how to do something only once. Soon, the broom could chop wood and fetch water, feed the chickens, and bring the cow in from the pasture. It could even pick out simple tunes on the piano. Not a week passed before the widow's neighbors, the Spivies, found out about the broom. Their farm was just down the road, the only other place around. It was one of the 8 Spivey children who saw the broom first. When the boy told his father, Mr. Spivey ran straight across the road to the widow's house. "Is it true?" he demanded. "Did she really have such a broom?" "Oh, yes," Minna Shaw answered. "It's wonderful." She told her neighbor all about the broom and the witch who'd left it behind. Then she took him around to the back of the house where the broom was hard at work splitting wood. Mr. Spivey was horrified. "This is a wicked, wicked thing," he said. "This is the devil." The broom stopped working and, still clutching the axe, hopped toward the widow and her neighbor. Mr. Spivey, red-faced with anger, turned quickly and hurried home. Soon, more distant neighbors heard about the broom and visited the widow's farm. The men who saw it seemed to agree. It probably was a wicked thing. But their wives pointed out that it was a great help to the widow and could play piano well, considering that it struck just one note at a time. No one's feelings were as strong as Mr. Spivey's. "It's evil and it's dangerous," he told everyone who would listen. "We'll all be sorry if this thing stays among us." As days went by, the broom seemed as innocent and hardworking as ever. Though it had learned how to do many things, sweeping brought its special pleasure. It was, after all, a broom. Occasionally, when there was nothing left to do around the widow's house, it would hop down to the road that separated Minna Shaw's and the Spivey's farms. The road was dirt, of course, and the broom could amuse itself there for hours. One afternoon, 2 of the Spivey boys and their dog walked along the road where the broom was happily at work. When they saw what it was doing, they kicked the small stones the broom had swept aside back into its path. The broom ignored them and shuffled off to sweep another part of the road. But the Spivey boys would not leave it alone. They called the broom names. When it continued to ignore them, they picked up a couple of sticks and started tapping the broom's handle. Finally, it stopped sweeping. The broom turned to the 2 boys and knocked them both on the head so hard they fell to the ground in tears. The broom hopped off, but the Spivey dog ran after it, yapping and biting at its bristles. "Get him!" the boys yelled. The little dog leaped into the air and caught the broom by the handle. But he was not there for long. That evening, Mr. Spivey drove his wagon up to the widow's house. He was not alone. 3 men from neighboring farms were in the wagon, along with a long wooden stake and coils of rope. Mr. Spivey knocked loudly. When she opened her door, Minna was frightened by what she saw. "We've come for the broom," her neighbor told her. "It's beaten my sons and likely done worse to my dog." The poor animal was nowhere to be found. The widow could tell by their faces that the men would not be leaving without her broom. There was nothing she could do to stop them. For a moment she stood silently, then answered, "Of course, you are right. If it could do such a thing, we must get rid of it." She led the men into her kitchen. "It sleeps in here," she whispered, pointing to a closet. "If you move it carefully, it will not wake up." The men knew how strong the broom was and hoped the widow was right. They opened the closet door, revealing the slumbering broom. One of the farmers took it out and gently held it against the stake while the others wrapped it in yards of rope. They carried the broom outside, drove the stake into the ground, and gathered straw around it. Mr. Spivey lit the fire. In no time, flames turned the broom to ashes. Life soon returned to normal around the widow's farm. The Spiveys even found their dog, healthy but hungry, caught in the branches of a tall spruce tree. Then one morning, Minna Shaw called on her neighbors with frightening news. She had seen the ghost of the broom. It was as white as snow and moved through the woods at night carrying an axe. Mr. Spivey did not believe her. But that night, under the full moon, he watched from a window as the broom's white ghost came out of the woods and slowly circled his house. The next night it returned, circling even closer, and the night after it came again, tapping the axe lightly on the Spivey's door. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Spivey packed their dearest possessions and 8 children into their wagon. Mr. Spivey tried to convince the widow to leave with them, but she chose to stay behind in her little farmhouse. She went down to the road as the wagon pulled away and waved goodbye to her neighbors. "You're a brave woman," Mr. Spivey called out. That evening, the widow fell asleep in her chair by the fire. She'd been listening to music. Simple tunes played one note at a time on the piano. A gentle tap on the shoulder woke her. She looked up and smiled as the broom, not a ghost at all, but still covered with the coat of white paint she'd given it. "You play so nicely," Minna Shaw said. The broom bowed, put a log on the fire, and played another tune. And that's the story of the widow's broom. Hope you have a happy Halloween.